Welcome, everyone. My name is Sean Randall Travers. The pronouns I use are he, his, and him, and I'm the Executive Director of EDI Learning and Professional Development. Before we begin, I would like to point out that the accommodations that are available for this webinar. There's closed captioning available with descriptions provided on the screen. We also have an ASL interpreter on video today. You should be able to see them already. If you need to follow the instructions on the screen regarding how to view the ASL translator by viewing side by side and the view options. There is also simultaneous translations in Spanish, and you can see on the screen how you do that as well. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the land that we are on. The UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where our campus is located. The university was built on the territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship. Thank you for joining us today for the first online event in the Tritons Belong series. We have additional events throughout the academic year and resources that may be found on our webpage. All online events will be recorded and posted online. If you would like to learn more about the Tritons Belong series, the online and the in-person events, and other related resources, please visit our webpage at diversity.ucsd.edu/Tritons-Belong, which we have also provided in the chat, and the QR code, which is on the screen. Now, I am pleased to introduce a video by Chancellor Pradeep Khosla to welcome you to today's session.
Hello, Tritons, and welcome. Since early in this academic year, we have seen a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on college campuses nationwide. At UC San Diego, we will always stand in solidarity against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all forms of hate, discrimination, and intolerance. We actively cultivate a community in which everyone feels a sense of belonging, and we commit to learning, to supporting one another, and working towards mutual understanding. As part of this commitment, UC San Diego is launching a new series called Tritons Belong. This series begins with a focus on building understanding and compassion in these challenging times. Our first discussion will focus on dialoguing across differences in times of conflict. The second discussion will explore issues of free speech during challenging times. And next, we will discuss both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in their various forms. And, more importantly, how to avoid harmful assumptions and biases towards these valued communities. These discussions in the Tritons Belong series are fundamental to the connections we build when practicing our principles of community in everyday interactions with each other. At UC San Diego, we must express our views and engage in conversations about issues of great importance in a manner that honors the inherent dignity within each of us. This means listening to one another with empathy, with tolerance, and with compassion, even when these diverse beliefs and opinions are deeply rooted and such conversations can be uncomfortable. Because in doing so, we promote belonging for all members of our Triton community, and we deepen our understanding and our compassion for one another. So I encourage you to continue your learning and your understanding through this series and within your communities, because Tritons belong at UC San Diego, and you belong at UC San Diego. Finally, I want to express my sincere gratitude to our Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Dr. Becky Pettit, for her leadership and for convening this important conversation and discussions. And finally, thank you to each and every one of you for contributing to an inclusive UC San Diego campus community.
A sincere thank you to our Chancellor for his opening words as we begin the Tritons Belong series. I would now like to welcome Dr. Becky Pettit, our Vice Chancellor for the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Vice Chancellor Pettit joined UC San Diego in March 2015 and brings over 25 years of progressive administrative experience in equity, diversity, and inclusion work across the higher education community. Prior to UC San Diego, she served as the Associate Vice President and Chief of Staff for the Office of Diversity at Texas A&M University, and served as adjunct faculty in the College of Education and Human Development, with scholarship focused on diversity in higher education, cultural competence, organizational development, and inclusive teaching and learning. VC Pettit provides vision and leadership to and across UC San Diego through campus-wide strategic plan for inclusive excellence focused on 3 key tenets: access and success, climate, and accountability. Her leadership extends to 8 campus resource center and programs serving the UC San Diego and local community. Welcome, Vice Chancellor Pettit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Travers, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. We are so grateful for your time and your commitment to learning how together we can contribute to a campus environment where all community members feel valued and respected. We've heard from so many at UC San Diego regarding the impact of the war in the Middle East and what people are doing within their own units to become more educated, to address climate issues, and to provide support to each other. Understanding and compassion are vital in these challenging times. Today, we have 2 individuals from unique backgrounds who've been working together for many years and who are here today to share and to model how we as a campus can dialogue across our differences, particularly during difficult times. Saima Nasim is a community organizer who leads initiatives and develops programs throughout her community. She sits on several nonprofit boards in the greater San Diego area, including San Diego's Muslim Community Center and the local chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, allowing her to support impactful change at both the individual and the community level. We also have with us Dr. Bob Berk, who is the founder of New Table Consulting, a group that focuses on building capacity in individuals and organizations and helping mission-driven organizations improve their efficiency and success. Dr. Berk specializes in training teams, community groups, and educational organizations, and he's a Triton alum with a degree in biology. Welcome, Saima and Bob.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Pettit, and also thank you to Chancellor Khosla for introducing the series, for inviting us to be part of this, and for allowing our voices to be heard as we all work together to build community. As we move into our content and our talk today around dialoguing across differences in times of conflict, I do want to briefly share a little bit about the National Conflict Resolution Center so that everybody knows the place from which we bring this material and we bring our mindset. NCRC was founded 40 years ago right here in San Diego, initially as a very hyper-local community mediation center. And from that, we've grown statewide, nationally, and even internationally to do work wherever conflict and community and communication overlap. We feel like these efforts are so important in helping bridge and helping people understand one another, and as Vice Chancellor Pettit said, in helping community members feel valued and respected. So this invitation today is incredibly meaningful to us, for me because I'm a UCSD alum, and to both Saima and to me because this is our home, and your efforts on campus contribute to all of our efforts kind of in the community and beyond. So with that, I just want to offer gratitude to the entire team who has put so much effort into the behind the scenes work, the whole department at UCSD and also at NCRC. And Saima, I know you'll move the conversation forward.
Thank you, Bob. All right, so this webinar is entitled Dialogue Across Differences in Times of Conflict. And so we understand the challenge of the current conflict on people, the emotional toll and feelings of division. So naturally, this leads to the prevalence of challenging conversations in our lives. So we are here to help guide you with the tools and skills that you can utilize during these times. I'd like to start by launching our first poll question to gauge where our audience is. So let's go ahead and get that poll started. And the question is, Have you recently found yourself involved in a challenging conversation with someone about a difficult topic? So it's a yes or no response. And while we're waiting for the responses to come in, Bob, have you found yourself in this position recently?
Absolutely. You know, Saima, we've spoken about this a lot. I used to shy away from these types of conversations, but now I really try to engage, mostly for two particular reasons. First, I realize that the only way for me to try to connect with somebody who has a different viewpoint is to listen, and to listen with the goal of understanding. Otherwise, I find that I make assumptions about that person, which in the end isn't helpful at all. The other reason why I have now really tried to engage in these harder conversations is because I feel like engaging in respectful and authentically curious conversations across differences is incredibly intellectually stimulating and also pushes me on how I create and maintain relationships. I learn more about myself and about others. And in the end, I feel like when I engage in these conversations, I'm able to create a bridge. And I feel like these bridges are really important for the communities in which I live, we all live, work, and play. What about you, Saima? I'm going to guess
Definitely.
that you're pretty actively involved in these
Yeah.
conversations as well.
Yes, definitely. And I can relate to you on the second part of what you shared. I feel that these conversations actually open the door to strengthen relationships, surprisingly, when they're approached correctly. So that's the key. Okay, so looking at the results, we definitely have a majority saying yes, that they have had one of these challenging conversations recently. So we're at 85% and 12%. So, I mean, that's expected, at this time, right? And that's why it's important to learn the skills and techniques to work through these types of conversations. So with that, Bob, I'll hand it over to you for our next poll question.
This sounds great. Thanks so much. So as we pull up the next poll, we're going to ask you to select all that apply. So the question is, where have these challenging conversations take place for you? And the options that we have are in person, social media, text, phone, and then where, right? Work and in personal life. So as people are ringing in their answers, I'd love to share a little bit. Saima, for me, I don't engage so much in social media. I'll look at LinkedIn and occasionally I look at Facebook. For the most part, I never participate or engage in those conversations. Same with text and phone. I feel like to have these in a way that really allows us to understand, for me at least, it's in person. And while I know some people limit conversations to personal life and not in the workplace, I feel like I'm actually better able to work with people when I have an understanding of who they are, what their values are, and where they're coming from. So I don't tend to shy away from these conversations. Saima, what about you?
Yeah, so I would agree. I think for me, it's mostly been in person. When it comes to social media, like you, I avoid, having these deeper conversations on social media. I do like to gauge and see where people are at. I might look at the comment section, but I definitely am not one to get in there and start commenting. I just don't feel it's productive. So I avoid that. And then when it comes to work, I would say I haven't actually been in these challenging conversations yet. But in the work that we do, Bob, right, the circles that we've been conducting, I do see how these conversations are being handled, again, with the right tools, and the results are so inspirational.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm chuckling a little bit that there's no response. Nobody has these conversations over the phone, maybe because the only people who we speak to on the phone these days are, our family members from another state or our grandparents. But, I think that what's really interesting for me to note is the difference between the number of us who are engaging in these conversations in personal life and those of us who engage at work. And what seems clear is that there are some workplaces that don't encourage these conversations and others that do. And of course, every workplace has their own norm. And I think that when we think about this, and we think about the value, like, is it the norms of the workplace or is it the policy of the workplace? And for some of us, it's hard for us to be in relationship in the workplace if we can't really share with people who we are and what we're really thinking. And that's just a balancing act, I think. So Thank you so much to everybody for going through these polls with us. We really appreciate it. And Saima, I know we have a little bit more to share before we jump into kind of our first theoretical piece.
Exactly, Bob. So let's go over the purpose of today's webinar. So this webinar is not intended to try to persuade you to change your beliefs or positions about any topics. The purpose of this webinar is to provide you with the ability to have a dialogue in a respectful way with people who hold different beliefs than you, and to increase your ability to understand the perspective of others. So we will be talking about skills and ideas that are important for dialoguing across differences in times of conflict, today and in the future. And so we want to work on creating a productive and respectful interactions. That's our goal today. So we'll start, we like to start our webinars and trainings with a quote. So let's jump right into it. So on this slide, we see the quote by William James. Whenever you're in conflict with someone, there is one factor that can make the difference between damaging a relationship and deepening it. That factor is attitude. So again, our approach to conflict is key. When you lead with your values and keeping an open mind for the greater good. I love looking at it from the lens of approaching conflict as a problem to be solved rather than a battle to be won. I mean, this says, something which I would learn in my master's, and I've kept it with me constantly because when you approach it like that, it's a very different outlook. What are your thoughts on the quote, Bob?
I love this quote mostly because I feel like it puts the responsibility back on me. By saying there's one factor that makes the difference when we're engaging in conflict and how we dialogue, and that the factor is attitude. To me, like, do I walk in with the mindset of we're way too far apart, there's no way we're going to find common ground, and also their opinion's ridiculous? Or do I walk in with the attitude of, I think my perceptions are really valid, and at the same time, because I'm in a relationship with this person in some way, I really want to do a better job of understanding. So it just puts that relationship, the responsibility back on me, which I think when we're thinking about conflict and conflict resolution and really understanding somebody, it's not a passive piece, it's active. So as we move to the next slide, what we'd love to do is share with you a concept that's really at the core of our work at the National Conflict Resolution Center. And it's a model that we've developed. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Lisa. It's a model that we've developed called the ART. ART is an acronym. The A stands for active awareness, R, respond respectfully, T, troubleshoot together. And this is a model that we present it as a cohesive model. And also, we're totally aware that people can take individual pieces of the model and use it in different places. Over the course of the next half hour that we'll spend together, Simon and I will share a little bit more about the different components of the ART. We do want to start, though, in talking about the ART as we move to the next slide with the idea of active awareness. So when we think about active awareness, you can see the text on the slide. I want to share just a little bit more about style differences. For us, when we're really thinking about our styles, we know that we communicate in a certain way. So some of us really bring emotion into a conversation, and some of us feel like emotion should be avoided. Others of us are pretty direct communicators. We say what we think, and for others, we're much more kind of roundabout in how we get to our message. And our belief around style differences is that there's no one right style, but our job as people who are communicating during difficult conversations, our job is to figure out how our style and the style of the people we're speaking with, how we can create that bridge. So I might have to adjust a little bit or understand something about them to really do a better job so that we can understand. My favorite piece on this slide, though, is the second line, which is about checking your bias and your ego. The bias piece, I feel like, is very clear to me. We're human. We have bias. That's our reality. Also, we're human, and so we can make choices and be proactive about things to do to reduce our biases. And Simon's going to talk a little bit about that later. For me, it's the ego piece that I feel like I always come back to, perhaps because coming back to something means I'm still wrestling with it. And that when we come into a conversation and we feel like we're right, is there also room to believe or to say or for allowed to the possibility that somebody else might be right too? And what I find interesting about this is it's not just right about our perception of event or the knowledge we have or the facts that we think are important. But we also have to acknowledge that we might think that we have the morally correct and unassailable position, and we might be right about that. And also at the same time, somebody else might have the same bit of platform to stand on their moral relevance. So that's a piece that I always come back to. The last part of active awareness around processing your perceptions, this is really different depending on how much time you have. In some instances, for example, it's in a conversation that you didn't know you were going to have and you have a second to prepare. What does your gut tell you? Other times you have a little bit more time to think things through. This is a little bit about active awareness. We think it's so helpful, even just taking, I was an elementary school principal for a long time. We always taught like, take a deep breath to kids when they were in conflict. Same thing here, like take a deep breath and allow yourself to be aware before you kind of launch into the conversation. So as we move to the next slide, we want to share a few considerations that you can consider before you engage in dialogue. And there's a few up here that we think are incredibly important to consider. I do want to highlight just a couple that I think for me really resonate, especially during this particular time when conflict is so heightened. I think the one on the top left, which asks us to consider other points of view, how they might differ, and also, can I learn from somebody else's point of view? Saima and I are going to use the word curious a few times over the course of our time together, and I think anytime we can really be curious, asking questions because we want to learn more, not because we're leading somebody or judging them, we're just so much better along the way. And then the green box, the piece about values. We're going to do a poll about this in a minute, but so much of our work as people falls back on what we value and how we express those values as individuals in our personal lives, in our workplace, and on the teams that we work with. So what we'd love to do here is pause for a moment to take a look at this poll, and then I'll share a little bit more about some of the other pieces on the slide. So as we look at the poll, the ask is, which values would help you navigate a challenging conversations? I think you'll have the ability to choose two, but if not, choose your first one as kind of the one that you really feel most strongly about, and then choose a second one. And the options that you have on the poll are empathy, respect, courage, acceptance, open-mindedness, and then, of course, we all have other values. There are so many to speak of. So as people are taking opportunity to ring in with their answers, Saima, of course, I'm curious, which two values are resonating with you this morning?
You know, Bob, choosing just two is tough. I feel all of these values add to these, difficult conversations, right? But if I had to choose two, I would go with empathy and respect. So I would say understanding and feeling what they're feeling when it comes to empathy. And, respect is needed for all of these challenging conversations. Actually, even if they're not challenging, respect is something, I would definitely prioritize. And yeah, so those would be my two values that I would choose.
Nice. So you won't be surprised to hear this. You and I have some overlap. My two choices would include empathy, which was one of yours, and really for the same reasons that you mentioned, which really I think felt strong to me. The second value that I really hold when I enter into these conversations, and I know I'm in the minority based on the slide, the second value that I bring is courage. And I'll be totally honest, this value's taken me a while. I feel like I've always had the value, but I have not always been good at turning it into action. So for me, initiating a hard conversation is the hardest part. And that's where the courage comes in. I feel like without courage, I don't engage. And then I wind up in a bubble of my own making. I don't think that's good for me. And truthfully, I don't think it's good for the communities in which we live when we all live in our own bubbles. We're just not able to understand if we don't have the courage to engage. What happens to me when I live in my bubble is I make judgments, and those judgments come from assumptions. And that just, I don't think that's fair to anybody who we're in a relationship in our personal lives or in the workplace or in the communities in which we live. So it seems like people are done weighing in. The two top values that people are sharing on at least the people have self-selected into this webinar, right, are empathy and open-mindedness. I think that this open-mindedness is incredibly important, and it aligns really well with our word around curiosity. So thank you all for engaging in these polls. It's a nice way for us to see kind of where you are and what you're thinking, and to add a little bit of your thoughts into the webinar. So as we jump back to the slide that we were on before on considerations before you dialogue, I do want to also lift up what's in the orange dialogue box, which comes from a book by Monica Guzman, which is entitled "I Never Thought of It That Way." And in addition to what's in the orange box around parity, Guzman suggests that there are 4 other considerations, and if you look at the book, she calls them dials, that are important to think about that lead directly to whether or not a challenging conversation will be success. And each of these considerations or dials has different levels of importance depending on where you are. And I just want to share briefly kind of what they are. So if we look at the orange box around parity, this is really about, can both parties contribute equally? Can they both contribute equally to the conversation? So in many ways, this is the power dynamic, whether it's formal or informal. Guzman also suggests that prior to engaging in a conversation, people spend some time thinking about time. Do we have enough time to really engage? If we only have 10 minutes, that might only be enough time for me to try to understand the tip of what Saima is trying to share, and she might not have the opportunity to kind of hear me. And so do we have enough time for these conversations? And along with time comes attention. So are we mentally focused on one another and the topic? Or, you know, are emails coming in or texts coming in, or we have to run this errand or something else? So giving ourselves the time, the ability to really be present with time and attention is so important. And my cousin taught me a little bit about containment. Once I was with him, and I felt like he engaged in this conversation, and it quickly became clear to me that the conversation actually was not about the people involved, but about kind of the performative action. Containment is something that Guzman speaks about, and it's really who else is there? Are we engaging in the conversation just because there's an audience and we're performative, or are we engaging in the conversation to influence other people, or are we engaging in the conversation really to be curious and to understand? And the last thing that Guzman speaks about is embodiment, and this is about the body language and our facial expressions, our micro expressions, those things that people read in addition to the kind of language we use that we hear. So I feel like these considerations for some of us come incredibly naturally. They're part of who we are. They're part of a skill set that we built up. And for others of us, it's something that we need to spend more time thinking about, like thinking about how do we want to approach a conversation? Do we just put out a message because that's what everybody else on social media is saying and we tend to agree with it? But do we put it out there because this is kind of the flow of the communities that we live? Or do we put out a message because we want to engage and learn and dialogue and try to create some sort of bridge? With that, I feel like, Saima, it is your turn, and I know we're going to jump into a topic that both of us find incredibly important around bias.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to bias, it's important that we actually, before we even begin to dialogue, that we're aware of our biases. So there's 2 that we're going to discuss today, in-group and polarization. These 2 types of biases are problematic when discussing these challenging topics. So cognitive biases block our ability to discuss controversial topics, and that's why it's important that we need to recognize them. So first is in-group bias. This occurs when favoring one's own group, this particularly over other groups. So this bias affects our perceptions of others, and actually research shows that this type of bias can go beyond kindness to one's in-group. It can also spill over to harm towards an out-group. So again, we see why awareness is so vital. And because we are more likely to favor people who are like us, again, our in-group, we're naturally predisposed to favor them and their perspectives. Something to consider, though, is with the politicized nature of our stacked identities today, that we're more likely to make a lot of assumptions about and have biases for or against people around their group identities. So for example, people may assume that if you're a Democrat, you support gun control, you are a religious, you are elitist, and live in a big city. We know these don't apply to all Democrats. Again, we see layers in who is considered a Democrat. Perhaps none of these even apply. On the flip side, if you're Republican, people assume you oppose gun control, you're religious, and you're a blue-collar worker who lives in a rural area. Again, these all don't apply to all Republicans. There's layers in our identity. Again, stacked identities. So this actually complicates the group identity and in turn, who we think is in our group and who is not. So something to really consider. When it comes to polarization bias, we actually overestimate how different we are from people on the other side of the political divide. So we wrongly believe that we disagree with more people more intensely and on more issues than we actually do. And we believe that people on the opposing side hold more extreme beliefs than they do, and that there are more people on the other side who hold these extreme beliefs. And it's interesting to point out that an international research study describes an effective intervention. So researchers informing participants that they overestimated the extent in which those from the opposing political group dislike them. This actually reduced the participants' dislike and mistrust of those people, right? Fascinating results. So let's talk more about overcoming the impact of bias. So a couple of questions I'd like us to think about. The first question is, what is the benefit of being aware of your biases before discussing controversial topics? So for me, Bob, it's to challenge myself to broaden my mindset, encourages me to become more inclusive, cultivates growth, and again, creating more authentic relationships. How about you, Bob?
I think that's incredibly true. And I think your answer around cultivating growth and being inclusive is certainly aligned with my feelings. I also feel like if I'm aware, I can reduce the impact of my biases on somebody else. And if they're my biases and I own them, it feels like it should be my responsibility to try to reduce the impact on somebody else.
All right, and the second question to think about is, what can you do to overcome the impact of in-group and polarization bias? So for in-group bias, for me, it would be to interact with other groups. Combating the us versus them mentality, I think, is so important. For polarization bias, it's downplaying the fringes and highlighting the median. So it's to correct misconceptions, right? I find myself doing that quite a bit. When there is something I know is inaccurate, I like to jump in there and say something, because we know that extreme views are amplified. So countering that with accuracy is really, really important. Bob, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is a challenge that we just always have to be conscious of. And there are specific things that we can do to connect with other people that allow us to reduce the impact of these biases. And I think that, you know, each of us is part of many, many, many different groups, some by choice and some, you know, by how we were born or where we grew up or our family structure. And those groups that we're part of are, you know, in some ways you could say kind of back to that bubble that I referenced earlier. And so how do I make a choice to reach out and be part of somebody or learn from or connect with somebody else who might not be in a bubble that's natural to me? So I think those efforts are incredibly important and things that we have to do to reflect on what can we do. To me, this is not passive. It's absolutely an active step that we have to take. So as we move to the next slide, we're going to look a little bit at political diversity. We're not going to land here for that long. I think one thing that we can be certain of is that we all have been pretty aware of the diversity and the kind of political divisions that exist in our country. There's two pieces of this research that we find interesting, and the research is from 2018. So while the percentages at the very bottom of the slide might not be perfectly accurate right now, we think the spectrum and kind of the rough division is still pretty accurate. So, so the two pieces that we want to point out here are that even if somebody has the same political stance in general, two people can certainly disagree on a specific controversial topic. And this connects us back to what Saima shared about 10 minutes ago around assumptions related to stacked identities. Just because I'm a progressive activist doesn't mean I favor gun control. Or just because I'm a devoted conservative, I may be in favor of tighter gun control. And what we learn from this is that people don't want others to speak for them. If we look at the exhausted majority, so in the middle of that arrow, we see 60% of the people in our country, 67% of the people in the United States population are somewhere in the middle, and people are tired. And we understand that. And one of the things that we understand comes from that is that those who live somewhere in the middle, can be incredibly affected by the heated disagreements of people on the wings, especially because those voices are the loudest and get the most attention when we look at our media sources. And for us, what this says is, if we're part of the exhausted majority, or we want to engage, but we're tired, it seems like the appropriate way and kind of to engage around this is to be curious, to try to understand, to go back to what Chancellor Pettit said at the very beginning around valuing and respecting all community members. So as we move off of this hidden political divisions slide, Saima's going to go back and we're going to return to our art model to learn a little bit more.
Thanks, Bob. Yes, so the second part of the art is R, which stands for respond respectfully. So this starts with active listening. You want to maintain curiosity and also be aware of your body language. We want to make sure that we're setting the right tone during this time. So active listening. Next is asking your open-ended questions. Your questions will reflect, again, a genuine desire to gain understanding of the other party's perspective. And how you ask these questions is just as important. And the last part is acknowledge without necessarily agreeing. So you recap the speaker's main points in your own words. You're reflecting their feelings. You're not necessarily agreeing with them. Rather, you're acknowledging that you listened to what they shared. So there's a difference between that. And when you repeat what they said, I mean, they're going to feel, okay, this person actually listened to me. So on the next slide, we see something that we talk about regarding underlying needs. So in conflict resolution, we like to use a concept of a tree. So the branches represent the complaints or the positions, okay? So it's what you see, what people say when they are in conflict. It's what you hear initially during the conflict. And these, again, are your surface statements. You're not going to gain too much insight here. You need to look deeper. And so this is when we look at underlying needs. This is when you look at the roots of the tree below the surface. So these roots, they represent the values and the needs. And these may include respect, acceptance, acknowledgement. When you can identify these needs and values, you will understand why someone has taken a certain position. So when someone states their position, look for and ask questions about what is really important to them as part of your respectful response. You're going to be focusing on finding and naming these needs during a dialogue. So by focusing on needs, you may be able to find common ground with the other person as you think through your needs as well. And so doing so, you can actually help build a connection with the other party, right? Because all of us, human needs are universal. We all have these human needs. A beautiful example, has been recently in the circles we've done together, Bob. The topic was heavy, but seeing the impact of responding respectfully has touched me deeply. It's been profound. So let's move on to some tips for dialogue on our next slide. And these will come in handy, again, when you're having these types of conversations. So looking at the first one, try to identify the underlying needs that are really important to the other person and are driving their position on the topic. So just as we talked about, identify these needs is what helps us pave the path forward. Next one, work on trying to be thoughtful instead of trying to prove that you're right. So when you approach conflict with a solution-focused lens, rather than a blind commitment to winning an argument, you will transform the conversation. Our next tip is do what you can to really listen to the other person as much as possible. Show genuine curiosity about what led them to their opinion of the situation. So this reminds me of the concept that we train on, Edgar Schein's theory on humble inquiry. It's drawing someone out. It's building a relationship based on genuine curiosity and interest in the other person. And our second to last tip is listen without thinking about how to respond or argue your perspective. And what comes to mind here is a statement. The biggest problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. So be in the moment, right? You're not just sitting there trying to think of what are you going to say next? How can you counter their statement? But really listen to what they're trying to say. And our last tip for dialogue is ask yourself, how can I say what I want to tell them in a way that they can hear it? I'll pass that one over to you, Bob, to transition into our last part of the art.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Saima. My ability to listen without thinking about how to respond or argue my perspective is directly related and correlates with how fast my heart is beating. When my emotions ramp up, I'm less able to do this. And I think this goes back to why the A part of the art is so important, why being aware is so important. Because then if we can be aware, I feel like I can reduce how quickly my heart's beating and I'm better able to respond in a genuinely curious way, going back to that humble inquiry that you mentioned earlier. So as we move to the next slide, we do want to jump into the T, and what the T stands for is troubleshoot together. For the people who I work with at NCRC, they all know that this is my very favorite part of the art. And one of the things I think has been most helpful for me in engaging successfully in dialogues across difference or in hard conversations. So I want to share a little bit about why I love troubleshoot together. The first is because I think this piece around troubleshooting together magnifies the power of thoughtful, proactive, and receptive language. And that when we are really inclusive in the language we use in a way that asks for an understanding, asks for us to understand somebody else before we share our own understanding, we're so much better able to get to the point where we can find common ground and perhaps a solution or at least an understanding. So that's the first reason, the language piece of the troubleshoot together, the language that starts in respond respectfully and moves into troubleshooting together. We're going to share some examples of that language in just a couple minutes. The other reason I love troubleshoot together is because both of us, Saima, have been incredibly involved in mediation efforts and facilitating dialogues. And we find that when we're able to use the skills that come from troubleshoot together, there's success. And so how can a person not love what brings success to individuals and in who exist in communities? So the piece I think on the troubleshooting together piece is I shared is how to, sharing your perspective in a non-confrontational way. And we'll get to some language examples in just a minute. Before we do that, though, we do want to move on to the next slide and share a little bit about how do we talk across this divide and how do we demonstrate that we're receptive? So much of what we speak on and teach on and believe and hopefully I do in my own life is that if I really want to share with somebody, if I really want them to understand my point of view, I've got to be receptive first. And I feel like that's what you shared, Saima, when we did respond respectfully. And here are some 3 tips that that we think people do well to consider when they're talking across the divide. I want to just lift up the piece around hedging. Because I feel like when we come to a conversation with somebody where we disagree, and we start from the place where we express with our emotion and our tone and our words that we are 100% correct, and there is absolutely no way anybody who wasn't a kind person could disagree, we've closed the conversation off immediately. We can express our feelings in a way that allows people to hear us, but hear us in a way that says, hey, I'm also interested in what you have to say. That might not mean I ever change my mind, and it may not mean that they ever change their mind, but it does mean that we can build understanding. And if we hedge by using words like I'm inclined to think, or could we consider, that language sounds less dogmatic and feels much better received. So a few other thoughts on the slide that I see that you can see those. I don't think I'm going to share out any more about the different dialogue boxes that we see, other than to say that like anytime we can frame something in the positive or even in the neutral, it takes us much further than framing something in the negative. Negative just puts people on their heel and asks them to leave a conversation. So let's take a look at the next slide. In the next slide, I said we were going to share some specific language examples with you. So as you see this slide build through kind of number 3, you can see that the piece on the left is really about language that we often hear or use. And the piece on the right is language that we're suggesting might be better at trying to create a bridge. And in this case, I'm very interested in the language around you don't care about, because so frequently, especially when I'm mediating a conversation or mediating with people who have been in a relationship for a while, I will hear them say, you don't care about this. And my experience is, except for people who might be at the incredible extreme, like everybody does care. And I also believe that we're not always able to see how they care. And that's because we haven't seen the values that they bring into account or the experiences they hold that informs their perspective, or the life that they've lived with their family that informs their perspective. We can understand those, we can understand what seems to be important to them. And that really allows us to move out of the mindset of people on the other side don't care, and instead to be thinking about, oh, this is important, and they get to a path in a certain route. So as we build the slide, if we continue building the slide through number 5, there are a few more examples that we think are incredibly helpful. It's rarely a great idea to tell somebody, oh, but you aren't considering this, or you haven't thought about that. Instead, it's better and more productive language to think, oh, here's some common ground. I think we both want this, but we're perceiving things differently. Let's explore that more. And then on the bottom of the slide, there are some other examples. I told you we were going to use curiosity a lot today. So on the bottom of the slide, there are some more examples around how we show that curiosity. You know, in general, I feel like the less we can use questions that begin with the word why seems to be a very judgmental question stem. And the more we can use open-ended questions that start in other places, the better it is for engaging in these conversations. I really would you mind sharing more about what that means to you? Even if we say like, oh, the value I'm bringing to this conversation is respect, we might define respect incredibly differently. And so the more we dive deep and ask people to share more with legitimate curiosity, the better it is. And the one question that's not on the slide that I think is so important to ask is, I feel like I might be missing something. What do you think I might be missing, and can you share more about that? Because oftentimes we just don't have all the pieces. And the more of the puzzle pieces that we can get, the better able we are to really understand and then dialogue across those differences. So that's it on my language soapbox, which I think is so important. And as we kind of look toward the tail end of the webinar, Saima has a few more slides to share, wrapping up our model. And then, you know, we are looking forward in a little bit to taking some questions from all of you as well.
Thank you, Bobby. I can't believe it's time to start wrapping up our webinar. So let's go over some concluding points. Remember to use the art as a tool when you're discussing controversial topics. Again, A for active awareness, R, respond respectfully, troubleshoot together, as we just went over right now. Next, it's important to understand that when discussing challenging topics that you care deeply about and can get emotional, on the next slide, we're going to see what it means to de-escalate yourself. So it's important for you to be aware of your own triggers and to de-escalate when you see that you're getting more emotional. So on the next slide, we're going to see some of these tips that you can actually utilize when you feel heightened emotion. The first thing to do is breathe, right? So taking your deep breaths to remain calm and collected. Think and then respond rather than reacting. So patience, this is a really valuable tool, not jumping into a reaction right away. And remember the other person's humanity, right? We're all humans. We all have our feelings and our backgrounds and our values and what makes us who we are. Keep that in mind. Ask questions to gain clarity and deeper understanding. Again, clarify as needed. Utilize the tools we talked about, asking those questions, humble inquiry, really trying to understand where is this person coming from. The next is take a break, right? This is something that if you feel you're getting angry, emotions are just out of control, none of your de-escalation methods are working, take that break. Because anger, it hinders our judgment and understanding. So you're not going to find a productive conversation when you're in that mindset. And lastly, reflect on why you're experiencing heightened arousal. So this is really, really important. All right, so now when you need to help others around you manage these challenging conversations, we see on the next slide, the Code of Civil Discourse. Okay, so this is developed by NCRC that many groups have used to govern their meetings and have adopted to create their own set of group agreements. Let's go over some of these. So again, the Code of Civil Discourse. We believe that the respectful and constructive airing is critical to successful dialogue. As community members, we pledge to engage in respectful and constructive civil discourse. Therefore, we will promote an inclusive environment where diverse perspectives are shared and considered. We will listen attentively and ask questions to understand others' positions. We will show respect for ideas and views presented even when we disagree. We will explain our positions by fairly presenting the reasons for them. And last, we will avoid personal attacks that distract attention from the salient issues. Or you can consider three recommendations for managing political polarization. So create an environment of cooperation, not competition. Encourage meaningful contact between individuals and groups with different viewpoints to counteract stereotypes and assumptions. And the last one is to create an environment of psychological safety in which people feel safe to share their views and even make mistakes when discussing controversial topics. So going on to our final slide, please visit our website or scan the QR code for more information about NCRC and resources to continue helping you have these challenging conversations. Looks like our time together is coming to a close. Before we take some questions, we want to thank UCSD leadership and the EDI team for hosting these critical webinars and discussions. Thanks to our wonderful team at NCRC for making this possible. And it's always a pleasure working with you, Bob. And thank you all for attending. And with that, we want to welcome back Vice Chancellor Dr. Pettit.
Thank you so much, Saima and Bob, for such an informative presentation. To our participants, if you'd like to continue this learning in person, we'll have an opportunity for you to sign up for small group sessions in the early part of the spring quarter. Following this session, a link will be emailed to you for you to sign up for those opportunities. We did save a little bit of time for our Q&A. And I'm grateful that Saima and Bob are gonna hang out for a few more questions. So we're gonna transition to that part of our webinar. So the questions will be coming to you now.
Thanks so much, Dr. Pettit. So we have a few questions that we see that you all submitted. I'll read the first one so we all have a sense of what it is, and then Saima and I will respond. So the first question that we have is, when talking across the divide, how can we pivot if the other party is not utilizing these conversational receptiveness tips and are persisting on being right? So they're not hedging at all. I love this question and I identify with the struggle. Saima, I know I have some thoughts, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to jump in first.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and share. It's not always easy, right? Because now that you've, taken this webinar, you've learned some of these skills, the other person may not know what you know. So what I would suggest in this moment is, you utilize the skills, you guide and facilitate the conversation as best as you can, and again, if there's emotions involved, the person is just, headstrong and they're not coming through, I would take a break and come back to it, because ultimately these skills are something that now and you want to share as best as you can with another person and let them know that the relationship is important to you, right? That you actually want to build a stronger bond. So you're not in here just to try to prove your point. You want them to hear your perspective and you're willing to hear theirs. Again, it's by finding that common ground.
Yeah. I really like that focus on common ground and perspective and thinking that through. The other thing is if people, are talking and then I feel like, oh, well, this is my opportunity, my opportunity to jump in and maybe share my perspective. And I start speaking and I get 5 words in and the other person jumps back in. What I'll try to do is just say some combination of the following. Like one is, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you weren't done sharing your perspective. I'm really interested in it. So, please, and then I will just defer. If it feels like it's gone on and I can't get a word in at all, I might even be so courageous, since that's my value, so courageous enough and say something like, Saima, I so appreciate you being willing to share all that you've shared. It really helps me develop an understanding. I feel like for us to really engage in this relationship and to have this hard conversations, I'd love for you to understand some of my perspective as well, not for the reason of convincing you to change your mind. I don't think I can do that, and that's not my goal, but I really would love to know, love for you to know more about where I'm coming from, just for the purpose of creating some sort of bridge of understanding. And I think sometimes when I use that language, which is very direct and clear about not trying to change your mind, I would love for you to just to understand, then people have to make a choice. Either they're going to respect my offer or not. And if they are not going to respect my offer or my ask, I'm probably going to end the conversation somewhat quickly by still expressing understanding, but also feeling like, maybe like Saima said, we need a break, or maybe we'll never get to that place. But I find those two strategies of being direct and also just kind of giving them more time if they need it can be incredibly helpful. So there's another question in the chat box, which is, I'm not really sure I understand all the issues. And sometimes it feels like if I don't understand it all, I can't even talk about it, especially with this war. So everyone I know is just silent about it all. What would you recommend? So this is from somebody who's really is paying attention to the war, but doesn't feel like they have such a depth of understanding, and is just feeling like people are quiet. So what would we recommend? So I think oftentimes we wind up getting pulled into conversations that are important to us, and at the same time, we acknowledge that our level of knowledge or involvement isn't the same as somebody else. And so in those cases, I feel like I do a lot of listening, and also I do a lot of kind of authentic curiosity if somebody's willing to share. And also I sometimes can connect with broader issues without knowing the details. So I can connect to the value of human life, for example, in many incidents. So if there's an incident of where somebody, doesn't matter where in the world it happens, but where somebody is hurt or killed or something, and I don't know all the details, I can connect to some of the values I have around human life, around equity, around taking care of other people. And, then I think part of this question is about being silent around things, and even silent with people who we're really connected with or have some sort of bond to. And sometimes I have just used this where I'll just say something to a friend, wow, I feel like we're sort of dancing around and neither one of us is engaging in conversation. And I think that's not representative of our friendship or of our relationship? How would you feel about over lunchtime, like just digging into this conversation? Because I'm really interested in your perspective. I'm interested in your opinions. And I want to bridge and I want to learn more. Have any additions to that one?
Yes, I think that's a really important question. You're not alone. There's many people who feel right now in the current climate, either they're, are really strong toward one side or the other, or like you mentioned, you're just not too sure about, where you stand or don't know enough about it. And as Bob mentioned, I think it's really important that we find the time, to have these conversations. You don't want to jump into it again when, you're high in emotions. This is that time, right? So you want to make sure that you're feeling okay, you're ready to talk about it, and, grounded in values, because that's ultimately what's going to drive these conversations to create stronger relationships, or even to maintain relationships. Because yeah, it's a very divisive time right now, and that's a reality of it. And there's a lot of emotions. Come in with an open mind and really think through, in terms of, is this something that, we can discuss right now? Should we change our environment? I actually have a background in design as well. And, your environment makes a difference. So, having a place like, Bob mentioned, go out for coffee or lunch, it's helpful. So I would really suggest that, if you feel the need to talk about it, you don't have to be silent, but make sure it's done in the best possible way.
Yeah. So we have two more questions. The next one is, we mentioned power dynamics briefly, and at UCSD, it seems like there are many power dynamics at play between supervisors and employees, between students and academics. There are real consequences to those power relationships, especially with political issues. And how would you navigate these using the ART model? Saima, I'll defer to you, and then I'm happy to chime in as well.
I mean, this is it's a real question. So when it comes to power dynamics, we're going to find them everywhere, right? It's not just here at UCSD. Job structures, where we are in life, there's going to be these power dynamics. And one thing I will say in commenting for UCSD is, like we mentioned some recent circles we've been doing, where it's leadership that's been actually wanting to hear from the employees, from the students, from residents, right? They want to understand, where is it that they are? What needs do they have? So I do see that there has been a lot of positive, impact from leadership in that direction. And again, like you said, navigating with the ART model, it's so important that, we begin, first of all, being aware of our own, biases and where we're at, responding respectfully, and then taking it, to that place where you can have those conversations with leadership, when I know that they want to create an environment, that's why we have this webinar today, where everyone can speak up and say what they feel in the most respectful way, and find that common ground and make this a safe space for all. Bob?
Yeah, I think that this question is a great reminder to me around, we can have all the courage in the world as a value, but also we might have a need, and that need is safety and security. And how do the need for safety and security, and also the value of being courageous, how do they interact and contradict one another in some ways when we're talking about this? I don't think that any of us can say that, engage in the conversation no matter what, don't worry about it, those sorts of things, because I feel like these power dynamics are real, and we engage in these at the university level all the time. Saima's kind of response to this, I think, was beautiful in, like, this is how we do this. And also we both want to say that that sometimes people feel more safe if they choose not to engage. And that's a decision they have to make for themselves. I think the problem comes in organizations where somebody with more power keeps wanting to engage around a conversation, and somebody with less power feels like, I don't want to engage. And then what language can you use? How do you share that in a way that isn't insulting, or doesn't make them mad at you, or doesn't, and to me, that goes back to language around expressing what your needs are and being fully transparent and saying something like, I'm also really conscious of what's going on with the war in the Middle East right now, and it has had a huge impact on me, my feelings, my thoughts. I also feel like this is an issue that in some ways I just prefer to engage in my personal life and not bring it into the work life. And that's something I feel like everybody can make an individual choice about. You're welcome to, but for me right now, I feel like for my safety and security, I just have to, opt out of the conversation. But I really respect kind of your desire to engage and don't want to kind of interfere with that with others. So, something that says, hey, I respect you, you want to engage in this. For me right now, I don't think I can. And then if they continue, I would stay firmly in the respond respectfully part, where you're just kind of expressing an understanding of what they're saying. You're not agreeing and you don't have to offer. You're just expressing an understanding. Okay, I think we have a little bit of time to jump into kind of one more question, which is, what if the person doesn't want to build a bond or connection? They're not open at all. What do I do? They won't listen to me at all. I think sometimes in relationships, sometimes one person wants what somebody else isn't able to give or doesn't want to give. And my feeling is like we have to respect that and acknowledge like that has an impact on our relationship, but we can't force somebody to do that. In that case, I feel like the two things that I would share are like I would model being receptive, model that with other people and let them know that I'm receptive to these conversations if and when they want to have them, and not try to force them in any way. Any additions?
I agree with that, Bob. Ultimately, you can't force someone to want to speak up or build a connection. These conversations and skills are, they're going to be, you're interacting with someone who's open to, sharing that with you or talking. So, if that person doesn't want to, again, like Bob mentioned, show that you are receptive to it, you're open to these conversations, you value your relationship. And to see where that goes. But again, you can't push someone to have these conversations. It's just not going to work. That's what I would say to that.
Thanks so much. So we have one more question that we got. And Dr. Travers, if it's okay by you, I'd love to kind of toss it back to you because I think this firmly lands in your expertise and we have some opinions, but I feel like you're probably the best person to answer this one around the workplace at UCSD.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Saima and Bob, for sharing your time and your expertise with us. The last question that came through that we want to touch on is it appropriate to discuss politics in the workplace? And if so, what tips do you do so effectively? At UC San Diego, we're guided by the principles of community, and that guides us in the workplace as well. And so depending on the culture of your workplace and how the principles are spoken about and talked about and lived, that will help guide you in terms of, can I talk about this in the workplace and what does that mean? It's a great question and a tricky one to answer. Again, so much delight for this conversation to be happening, for us trying to learn how to dialogue across differences. Bob and Saima, we look forward to having you on campus soon, as well as other colleagues from the NCRC, the National Conflict Resolution Center. Next week, we have another session in our Tritons Belong series. It's on Wednesday, February 28th at 10 a.m. It's on the topic of free speech in challenging times. It will be facilitated by Emerson Sykes, a senior staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union. That's the ACLU. Emerson's also an adjunct professor of law at New York University. And Emerson will be sharing his expertise around free speech as protected by the First Amendment within the context of higher education during times of conflicts. You can visit our webpage for more details using the QR code that is on the screen or in the chat. We'll also be sharing the registration link in the chat and following up with an email. I want to thank everyone again for attending today to show your commitment to a positive campus climate, to living our principles of communities. We hope to see everyone next week, as well as for the other opportunities with the Tritons Belong series. Look for an email for us tomorrow about evaluating this session and take good care. Thank you.